Well, it was 1983, and I was going down in the early summer of '83, and I had heard before arriving that Mike Boehm had left the country and left the camp. So the goal was to go into garage again. And I had met Ida Bagus, who could get the permit and set up the boat in Groningen Village, and we did that. So we ended up, John Dom and I, on the boat, and this guy had never gone to G-Land before. So we get to the keyhole, and it's completely low tide, the sun's setting. I convinced the guy to kedge it in, and we got about half of our supplies off the boat, and a rogue set came around the corner. I'd never been to G-Land before. It's so different. It's cool, it's a jungle, the water's cold, and the tide had started to fill in on the reef, and the set hit the boat, and the boat crashed on the reef, and we lost about half of our supplies. Fortunately, Steve Spalding was in the camp with his crew, and that was about it. Thankfully, he took us in because our mosquito nets went out in the current offshore, and a bunch of other stuff. But anyway, we holed up with Steve for about 4 or 5 days. The waves were only 3 to 4 feet. Then Steve left with his crew, left John Dom and I in there with 2 Californians. And we were up in Jerry's tree fort, the one made famous in the '81 article, and in the afternoon offshore wind, that tree fort disengaged from the large tree, and we fell down with the tree fort to the ground. I was just hanging on to the rafters looking for bungee sticks to come out of the floor, just wondering where I was going to get it from. But we landed on the mattress, John and I, and we were safe, you know. But that destroyed another percentage of our food and gear. Well, to make a long story short, everyone left, and I was left in the camp by myself. I'd moved up to the north camp, which was this leaning structure that looked like Mike had tried to destroy but didn't quite fall down. So I found myself that night, sleeping by myself in the mosquito net. Well, I woke up in the morning, and this huge swell was hitting. It was 10-foot Hawaiian. It was probably, in all the years I continued to go there, was one of the best money trees I ever saw. And waited for the morning glass to go away and the offshores to kick in. And then paddled out there, and it was huge, huge G-Land. And in the afternoon back then, the upwelling was really strong. The water was really cold, and there had been these big feeding frenzies of boils with everything in the world flying out of the water, and there'd been a lot of sharks in the water. So I had a lot on my mind, paddling out by myself. But anyway, made it out and started to surf the wave and caught a bunch of good waves. And I'd probably been surfing a couple hours when I saw Paul Deming's ferro cement yacht coming around the corner, and it was almost surreal to see this beautiful yacht coming in to the bay, and I had no idea what it was about. But I watched and watched, and the yacht came in and anchored, and then I looked really closely, and I could see surfboards on the bow of the boat. I was, wow, right, surfers. I was stoked to see someone out there, because basically I was thinking, man, I'm the only thing that any creature might want to bite, or whatever is going on in the water. At least add some numbers to it and have some fun. But I just remember this big 10-foot set came in, and it was right when you guys had pulled in. And so I took off and pulled into this huge barrel, and out of this big barrel was the frame of the boat and about 6 figures standing on the railing. And I rode that tube, and that was the first time I met you guys. That was the first time I saw you. And after that, well, I think we all surfed G-Land for a while there and caught a bunch of good waves together, and it was kind of the start of our friendship. Yeah, well, you guys were it was interesting to meet you because I hadn't really met surfers from Northern California. In fact, I didn't even know at the time I was 23 years old that there was surf in Northern California, and there's some really great surf in Northern California. But one of the characteristics of the majority of the crew, you guys all had beards and they were all blonde. So this was a whole nother, you know, kind of spectrum of surfers that I had not encountered before. And as that summer wore on, you know, I was running tours into G-Land eventually with Ida just so I could surf for free. And different characters were coming through and some friends from Oahu. And I don't know if it was Daniel Kaimi, the boogie boarder, or myself, but we gave you guys the nickname the Golden Beards, because as that '83 summer wore on, you guys kept coming back on the boat, and I kept coming back on the overland, and then we'd see each other, of course, in Bali, because Bali was a lot smaller place back then. There was just Made Warung and Bimo Corner, and the rest was coconut trees and bintangs and fields. So. Yeah, you guys became the Golden Beards for your golden beards. Well, it was towards the end of that summer in '83. We'd been going to G-Land all summer, and Don King was there, a good friend of mine growing up in Kailua, and we decided to do a little adventure. We went over to Giliere because we hiked a lot in Hawaii. We'd do all these remote hikes, so we were really into topo maps, and there was this great nautical store in Singapore you could get these great maps from. So we looked at Lombok and figured the Giliere Islands probably had the best potential for surf. So we went over and checked it out, and really wasn't much. Just a couple little Losmans and some really good diving. And so we headed back to Lembar. We had taken the Penang Bai ferry over, and we headed back to Lembar and caught the ferry in the afternoon. And as we were leaving Lembar in the afternoon sunset, we looked, and there was Desert Point from the ferry. And it was 6 feet straight offshore, and there were just 3 to 4 roping lines coming in, and it just was a mind blower. I mean, that was the wave, obviously, and I honestly thought of some way of jumping off the boat, but you know, fortunately didn't do that. So we got back to Bali, and we immediately made plans to go immediately back and try to catch that swell. We had ran into Doris, and he wanted to come along, Tony Elthrington from Australia, and so he did, and we flew back and we organized a small boat from Lembar to take us up to Deserts. And the boat dropped us off in Banco Banco. We hiked around, and unfortunately the swell had gone down, but we could see the potential. We were surfing it about 2 to 4, and the wind was a little bit side shore. We camped in this little pandanus tree, which was right in front of the middle section of the wave, which is the most consistent bowl section. We called it Pandanus Bowl. And we were just feral on the beach, you know, kind of full desert mode. The land was hot, it was deserty, and Banco Banco was full of mangrove trees. It was super mosquito-y, and it was pretty obvious this, you know, they had these maps of malaria back then, and Lombok was as red as it could get. So I decided, you know, to do our best, but we didn't stay long because the swell died, and we rode it. But what I noticed about it on that first trip was just how perfect the setup was, and I had seen the perfect waves from the boat, and so after that, you know, that was kind of the mission to get back there and surf it at its best. You know, on a bigger swell when I knew what it was obvious that it was an incredible setup. Well, the next year was '84, so I got down early, and since I had known Ida and had been running a lot of tours into G-Land, and basically just to go for free because I didn't have a lot of money back then, I hooked up with Ida to get a boat in Benoa so that I could go on a boat trip out there. And I had Joe Knipsel organize some surfers. They were Australians, and my wife-to-be, who I met in Legion, Sandy. We all went on this nice big boat from Benoa with a crew, and we went over to Deserts, and we went to Blongas. We explored the waves on Sumbawa. But the whole trip, which was about 10 days, really we didn't get any good surf. It was pretty flat the whole time. And so I came back to Bali, and there had been a bit of a mishap with the Australians and girls and the boat in Limbang, and so the crew of the boat that we went on had no interest in Westerners after that, and I don't blame them. I happened to be on the beach, didn't really have much to do with it. So I was looking for another boat in Banoa to go back, because I hadn't given up on the place. I knew there was something there. And I was organizing with Kutut Garam and his boat, which was the Shura Bhakti, a small 32-footer. And as I had just been culminating the deal, the Golden Beard showed up and said, "Hey, how's it? Yeah, well, this is our boat, so we're going on the boat," you know? And I was like, "Oh, shucks, there goes the deal," you know? But because I knew you guys, you're nice enough to invite me along. And so we set up our trip, and away we went. The 32-foot Shura Bhakti was a small boat, you know. The cabin, I think we had to crawl in, right? It was only about 4 feet tall, you know, you couldn't stand up in it. So we really were packed in like sardines in Shura Bhakti. And there was a 55-gallon drum of diesel lashed to the front mast that every time seemed to leak diesel, and it would blow into the cabin. So there was a sort of delirium all night from the diesel fumes. Well, I just remember that first trip pretty clearly, waking up, and since I was the guest, I had the honor of being right next to the open Yanmar diesel, right, the closest guy to it. And the thing is hammering away, right, just as loud as could be. So I've kind of come out of this delirium dream of someone, you know, knocking on the door and all this, and then kind of come out of it, and there we are chugging across the strait, and it was pretty choppy. I mean, the boat was pitching. And I remember looking out the back of the cabin and seeing our intrepid Balinese watermen, sailors. All three are holding the tiller at the same time, eyes focused forward. It's the middle of the night. And behind them is just a sea of new moon stars rocking back and forth. And I just was like, man, this is it. This is as good as it gets, you know. I was totally stoked. It was such a sense of adventure and anticipation, because I just knew there was a perfect wave there. And fortunately, you know, for us on that first trip, it came through in spades, you know. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably as good as it gets, really. I mean, just you and your friends at a surf spot is always as good as it gets, you know. And then to have one of the best waves in the world just happen to be there, because really, I remember the first trip was just blew our minds. It was everything and more that we thought of. It was the wave is just a tube, you know, the whole way across at perfect speed, and it was just like, I don't know, the holy grail of surfing. It just opened up, and then we just had a great, you know, rotation and a great rapport and a great sharing and a great, you know, experiencing this together. And the wave's so perfect, it's just a blank slate, and everybody can bring, you know, their dance to it, wherever they were at. I mean, it's an easy wave to ride. It's just a simple line, you know, there's not a lot of cutbacks or anything on that wave. So you could outrun it a little, or you could get as far back in it as you wanted. And it was just neat to see everybody's approach and just have that free feeling of exploring, you know, what you could do as a surfer, where you were at with it, and how the wave was sharing information with you, and you were giving back. And I don't know, after that, we all pretty much made a solid connection, and that was the beginning of a good 8-year run. There's a lot of them. I guess after 30-something years, some of them are a blur. You know, I used to come back after the trips in the summer and remember a few key pieces and think, oh, I'd never forget that. You know, I'd relive them all winter long until the next summer. But there was one that kind of stuck in my mind, and you know, the wave didn't really break at high tide, but we could see the whitewater, you know, foaming on the point, and then the tide would start to drop, and then the first lines would come through. And at a higher tide, as it began to drop, the wave was really fast. And so you had to really drive down the line. It was really smoking. And then it would hit a medium tide where it just turned into the perfect speed. And then at low tide, it was a little slower and kind of bowlier as it went down the line. But this particular wave was kind of in transition between high and medium tide. And there were really three parts of the wave as I remember surfing there. The takeoff was pretty smooth. It was pretty easy. And then that tube was kind of tall, and it wasn't really much of a tube actually, but you could get in it. And then it would hit the middle section, which we called the Pandanus Bowl, because there was the pandanus tree there on the beach, which was the only shade in the area. So it was pretty key when our first trip, when we went in there. And that's just a perfect cylinder. Guarantee you're gonna make it every time, you know, 8 to 10 second barrel. And then there was a third section that was impossibles, we called it, that ran to the cliff. And that was about a 50-50 proposition. And, you know, you would rush it sometimes, and sometimes it was obvious, you know, you were gonna kick out there. But this one wave I caught was a beauty, and I got fully tubed in the first section, came out just for a second to pull into the middle section, and it was just so fast, and I was in the thing for so long. Whitewater was coming in, and we were hopping over the whitewater, going into clear, hopping over whitewater, going into clear. It was just so far back in the thing. Like it seemed impossible. Like I had given up hope of making the wave. I was just trying to make it as far as I could, and kept going and going and going and going into impossibles, going and going, and I made it at the end somehow. Came out of this thing. And I mean, what did you say? The wave is about 400 meters long. And so I think I was in it the whole way, except for a quick transition from the first peak to the second. And, you know, one of the interesting things about the wave is, you know, at first you start surfing there, and coming from Hawaii, you know, tubes are kind of short. I started realizing I was always holding my breath in the barrel and not breathing. And so the waves are so long, you start to breathe, you know, learn to breathe when you're in the tube. And then, you know, at first you're like, gosh, I got tubed for 10 seconds on that one, or I got tubed for 15 on that one. But after a while, like the time of it just dissolved, and it was just, you're just being in this barrel was the experience of the wave. And because it ran so perfectly, there was also the sensation that you weren't moving forward. It was like being on a perfect treadmill where the tube was a constant, and you were a constant with it. And this was an interesting phenomenon because you could observe different things about a tube ride that you had never observed before. You could focus your attention on different aspects of the wave, like, oh, the lip is throwing like this, or look where it's breaking over here. And you could just stand there. It really didn't require much effort, you know. So the wave I described to you was a little more active because there was so much interesting features going on inside. But in general, it was just like being in the barrel. And the time aspect of it disappeared. And I just remember one time sitting there and seeing this 6-foot set coming in, and realize you have this realization you're going to be just in this draining barrel for the next 30 to, you know, minute or whatever it is, and the anticipation and just this understanding of what was about to happen, they just knocked your socks off, man. It was the most perfect wave in the world that I'd ever surfed, and probably I've ever surfed. Excellent switch foot. He was a switch foot there. He was a regular, but he switched goofy. And so you're surfing these perfect lefts or perfect barrels switch. So I gave him a lot of credit for that. Excellent switch foot, and always up for whatever the waves had to throw at us. Seed pod. The guy would just get into this seed pod position on his kneeboard, and he would just get barreled the whole way across. G-land, deserts. It was just a seed pod spearing across the waves and the tubes. And it was a very, very good knee boarder. Probably the best knee boarder I've ever surfed with. Bobby, yeah, great friend, best friend. Um, so thankful to have all your guys' friendships, you know, over the years. It's been great. Bobby is just a solid backsider, and I just remember him saying all the time, gosh, I wish we could find a right somewhere. But yeah, really good backsider and totally committed to the Indo experience and all that it had to offer. And yeah, he's just a really good guy. Mr. Bill, who's doing this interview. Yeah, just I think Bill, you're 66 now. You're still surfing just as good as you were back then. Just excellent, solid front side attack. Always positive. My best fishing buddy down there. We had incredible fishing adventures. Always stoked. Always something good to say. A great guy to travel with. Glad we made it to Raijua and back in one piece. Thanks to you.